everyone, welcome. I'm Kriti Mehta and you're watching the NewsX Eurozone. Let's take a look at the headlines this hour. President Donald Trump says Ukraine has 1 week to accept his peace plan. Kyiv and Europe push back as Moscow says the proposal needs more discussion. UK, French and German leaders say they'll try to strengthen the US peace plan for Ukraine when they meet at the G20 summit in South Africa. It comes as President Zelensky warns Ukraine faces one of its hardest moments amid pressure to accept the proposal. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz says he held a good and confidential call with President Trump about the US peace plan for Ukraine. He says they agreed on the next steps and that he will now brief European partners. European arms makers saw shares drop to their lowest level since August after reports of a US-backed Ukraine peace plan. Investors fear the 28-point proposal, which supports key Russian demands, could hit future defense orders. An independent BBC board member has resigned after the broadcaster admitted to an incorrect edit of a Donald Trump speech. His departure comes as the BBC faces a $5 billion lawsuit and just weeks before his term was due to end. Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko has pardoned 31 Ukrainian prisoners, according to state media. Officials say the move follows agreements he reached with President Trump at Ukraine's request. France's lower house has rejected key parts of the 2026 budget, casting doubt on whether a deal can be reached this year. The bill now moves to the Senate, which is expected to strip out many of the Assembly's amendments. The outcome of COP30 hangs in the balance as the European Union rejects a draft deal it said would fail to achieve climate goals. The bloc says the plan does not advance global efforts to curb greenhouse gas emissions. And now, viewers, let's track the top story this hour. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has warned that Ukraine risks losing its dignity and freedom, or even Washington's backing over a US peace plan that endorses key Russian demands. This comes as US President Donald Trump says that Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky will have to like a US-backed peace plan to halt Russia's invasion and ultimately approve it. Trump also said that the approaching winter, the mounting death toll and repeated attacks on Ukrainian energy plants underscore the urgency of ending the war. According to the draft plan, Washington's 28-point plan calls on Ukraine to cede territory, accept limits on its military, and renounce ambitions to join NATO. It also contains some proposals Moscow may object to and requires its forces to pull back from some areas they have captured. All right, and Gilbert Doctorow, a Russian affairs expert, is joining us live from Brussels. Very warm welcome to you and thanks for joining us here on NewsX World. What options does Ukraine really have, Mr. Doctorow, after its disapproval to the peace plan?
I don't think that Mr. Zelensky has many options. It is not in the public domain, but it's obviously the background to his remarks yesterday about withdrawal of U.S. support if he does not agree to the plan. What we're talking about now is critical to Ukraine's continuing military operations. If the United States withdraws its intelligence briefings that have made possible all of the targeting against Russia by Ukraine using various missiles and drones, if the United States withdraws them, then And if the United States stops supplying military hardware, which is paid for by Europe, but nonetheless is still coming from US stocks, if the United States stops doing that, then the Ukrainian army will simply roll over and die. And he knows that. So he doesn't have much of a choice.
Would you
He
have
will
to
accept
say,
it.
sorry, go on, please.
No, he'll accept it within a time frame, which means before American Thanksgiving on the 27th of this month, or he will face, his army will face ruin in a matter of days.
All right. But would you have to say on Ukrainian president and others saying that the peace plan seems to be shifted towards Russian interests more? Do you think that really is the case?
It is shifted towards European interests. It saves us from a world war. The only people who want to have this war are the 24 leaders of governments in the European Union. The European peoples have never been asked for their assent to the remilitarization of Europe to prepare for a war with Russia. So to speak about Russia as gaining anything is to miss the point of the whole plan. The entire plan is directed towards a normalization of relations between Russia, Europe, and the United States. These are points in the plan.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Dr. O, for sharing your opinions with us. But I request you to stay on, as I will be asking your opinion for another news story that we are coming up with shortly. For now, viewers, let's tell you that Russian Defense Ministry says that Russian forces have now captured Zaporizhzhia in eastern Ukraine and several settlements in eastern Ukraine, including the Yampil in Donetsk. However, Kyiv denies these claims, saying Yampil and other towns remain under Ukrainian control. Moscow also claims control of Staviki, Novoselivka, and Mazylyakiva, and a village in Dnipropetrovsk. Ukraine reports continued attacks but no confirmed losses. Fighting remains intense around Pokrovsk, a key logistics hub, as Russia advances slowly through Donetsk and Luhansk in its Donbas campaign. Russian forces hold about 19% of Ukrainian territory and continue operations in Zaporizhzhia further south. I will shortly be joined in by our international affairs expert to give us his opinion on this. But for now, let's tell you, viewers, this is coming in as Russia plans to conquer the entire Donbas region, and Moscow has also made claims that more and more areas of Donbas are now under its control. Ukraine, however, reports continued attacks but no such confirmed losses in its territory. Let's remind you now that Russia is in possession of about 19% of Ukraine's territory as of now, but fighting remains intense. And I want to bring back Mr. Dr. Rao into the discussions here. Mr. Dr. Rao, I just want to ask you now, Russia seems and claims to have annexed more territory in the region, but Ukraine clearly remains in denial. Does Russia really have any proof to substantiate its claims, given the opposition to the annexation of its territory that's coming from Ukraine?
Well, it would have had excellent proofs if the Ukrainians had assented to Mr. Putin's offer about a week ago to let Western reporters visit the city that has been most in focus of the confrontation between Russia and Ukraine over the last 6 months. That is Pokrovsk, as it's called in Ukrainian, or Krasnoarmeysk, as it's called in Russian, a city of about 400,000, which was the single most important, yes I do, which was the single most important defense, the fortified town in Donetsk, remaining in Ukrainian hands. And once this town falls, then and it's a matter of days because the Russian forces are in the city. Once the city falls, there is no serious obstacle to a clean Russian sweep straight to the Dnieper River. To say that the Russians control 19% of Ukraine, even if it's accurate. And I question that because we've heard that figure for the last 2 years. And in the last 6 months, every day the Russians have been advancing and taking several towns a day in the last several weeks. So it's incredible that it would remain at 19%. But that's an irrelevancy. The point is that the Russian position was based against the most strongly defended and fortified parts of eastern Ukraine that the Ukrainians had 8 years to prepare. They have largely overcome all of these fortified positions. And what remains is a flat plain to the Dnieper River. There are Kramatorsk and Slavyansk are small towns, but generally speaking, if the war is not stopped now, then it is a matter of several weeks and most several months before the Russians indeed conquer the whole of Donbass. The difference between the settlement that's being proposed now and the eventuality, if it is rejected, is tens of thousands of Ukrainian soldiers and several thousand Russian soldiers who will die in the meantime fighting a war that is preordained to go the Russian way.
Sure, we are looking out for negotiations, and if the peace plan that the US is drafting will work out. For now, I also want to bring in Ben Aries into the discussion. He's a journalist joining us live from Berlin. I extend a warm welcome to you, Ben. If you're there, can you help us understand the situation on the ground in Zaporizhia? Both sides, of course, seem to be making differing claims as far as the capturing of the region by Russia is concerned.
So this is relatively new, in so much as Russia is now occupying 4 regions, not including the Crimea, which it's had since 2014. And what's happened more recently is that the Russian forces have crossed into 2 new regions, into Zaporizhzhia and into Dnipropetrovsk. And these are regions that lie to the west of Donbass, and what it is in effect twofold. One is an outflanking movement where they're trying to get in around the back. As Gilbert was just describing, the battle for Pokrovsk is key. It's the nexus of various roads and railways, and it's used as a logistics hub to supply the whole of the AFU's defense on the Eastern Front. And what the Russians are now doing is going further into Ukraine, further behind the back, in order to cut off the supplies to Pokrovsk, and then strain the Ukrainian defense even further. The second part of the strategy is, because they're attacking new regions which are relatively lightly defended, because most of the fighting is going on in Donbass and Ukraine has a chronic manpower shortage, is they're trying to spread the Ukrainian forces thinner by drawing reserves, reinforcements out of the Donbass in order to protect Zaporizhzhia and Dnipropetrovsk. And it's being effective. The attacks on Zaporizhzhia in particular are scaling up, and that requires the AFU to send more reinforcements to protect them, which then depletes the already thin coverage they have in the key battle in Donbass.
All right. Well, thank you for sharing that information with us. I request you to stay on, Ben. We have some news coming out from Belarus, which has now pardoned 31 Ukrainian nationals as part of a new accord reached between President Alexander Lukashenko and US President Donald Trump. This move is being seen as a significant confidence-building step at a time when regional tensions remain high. According to the Belarusian officials, the agreement aims to reduce friction and open doors for broader negotiations involving the US, Belarus, and Ukraine. The pardoned individuals were detained on various charges, and their release is expected to support ongoing diplomatic efforts. The development marks a rare moment of cooperation amid the wider security crisis in Eastern Europe. And I welcome back Ben Aries as well as Gilbert Doctorow into the discussion, and I want to go first to Ben. Ben, this seems to be a welcome move for Ukraine and some good news amidst claims of annexations of its territories by Russia. But what significance do you think it really holds now?
I think it's very significant. I mean, it's a series of political prisoner releases that's been going on. I mean, if you go back to last summer, to August, there was that major Russian, Western, German exchange where they released a number of political prisoners, including a Wall Street Journal reporter. And there, Lukashenko is showing himself willing to cooperate with the West in these deals. But much more recently, just this autumn, Lukashenko has brokered a series of political prisoner releases directly with the White House. And Kellogg, the special envoy, was in Minsk, after which 14 prisoners were released, including the husband of Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, the presidential campaign who ran against Lukashenko in 2020 and started the whole protest movement. But that was followed by another release of 52 prisoners. And here we have 33 more. And what's going on behind this is Lukashenko is reaching out to the West, particularly to Donald Trump, who he has a relationship with. I mean, Trump has rung him directly and called him a great leader, despite his dictatorial past. And what Lukashenko is looking for is some leverage, because he's now become entirely dependent on the Kremlin, entirely dependent on Putin. And by improving his relationships with the West, it gives him some leverage in conversations with Putin, and who's supplying him gas, oil, food, everything he needs. And he's been in a very uncomfortable position. So this now, he's reaching out to the Ukrainians and trying to, improve his relationships with the West, simply to give himself some diplomatic leverage in his conversations with Putin.
Sure. I also want to go to Mr. Doctorow now on this. What's your opinion on the latest release of war criminals by Lukashenko? What do you think is the Russian stance going to be here?
Well, I disagree with my colleague as to where the initiative and what the driving force is behind this release. I don't think that Lukashenko is reaching out to Washington to have more leverage against Putin. I think that Donald Trump has reached out to Lukashenko in order to demonstrate that we and you can scale back the sanctions. We can go back to normalization. And this is a message to Mr. Putin via Lukashenko. Lukashenko has thrown in his lot completely with the Russians. And I don't think he was dancing from foot to foot. He was trying to extract various economic concessions from Mr. Putin going back more than a decade. And the relationship was rather testy. But as the last several years of this war have proceeded, Lukashenko has thrown in his lot with Russia. He has received very happily the Oreshnik. He has received very happily latest military hardware from Russia, and he needs that help. To say that he would distance himself from Moscow is to miss the point of what is on Mr. Lukashenko's mind. And it is not relations with Moscow. It is the question of relations with Lithuania and with Poland, who have been applying maximum pressure to his country to bring it to heel. He has refused. He has been very brave. And he has, in the last week, had an economic showdown with Lithuania over the closing of the frontier to truck traffic. He won that. He won that in part because he is strong and he has economic security coming from that tight relationship with Russia. In fact, we speak of them as allies. That is commonly the word that is used in major media, but that's dead wrong. That is, they are a confederated single state. Belarus and Russia are a confederated single state. Therefore, the notion of leverage against Moscow and by way of agreements with Trump in Washington is missing that point.
Sure. Well, I thank you for sharing your opinion with us here on NewsX World. Gilbert Doctor out there, but I request you to stay on with us, Ben, as I come back to you. But viewers, for now, let's tell you that a bipartisan group of U.S. lawmakers is moving to bypass House Speaker Mike Johnson and force on vote on tough new sanctions against Russia is concerned. Congressman Brian Fitzpatrick says lawmakers have formally notified the Speaker's office and are using a procedure that allows the bill to reach the floor without his approval, but only if 218 members sign on. The group wants the vote immediately after the Thanksgiving recess, and members from both parties say they're ready to support the move. Speaker Johnson has suggested the Senate should vote first, but the Senate's own sanctions bill has stalled. The proposed legislation would hit Russia and its trading partners with sweeping secondary sanctions, including tariffs of up to 500% on countries that buy Russian oil, gas, uranium, and other goods. President Trump says he supports the measure and would sign it. The Kremlin has warned it would react extremely negatively if the bill becomes law. And I want to go back to Ben Eris joining us live from Berlin. Ben, how do you see Russia reacting or retaliating if those sanctions are passed?
This has come up before. This is actually a bill that was a bipartisan bill that was spearheaded by Lindsey Graham, and they've been threatening 500% tariffs on specifically Russia's partners. So this is actually aimed at Russia itself. It's aimed at India and China as a way to get them to stop importing Russian oil. And when the EU banned the imports of Russian oil, the entire export of Russian oil switched from east to west, and it's all going to Asia and kept Russia in the game. It's earning some $200 billion a year from this business. And Russia would take very badly to this, but more importantly, India and China will also take badly to this, that they're being penalized for somebody else's war, and they're not happy about it. So Trump himself has actually downplayed this. He backed away from it, although verbally he supported it, and he came out with his own threat of 100% tariffs on the same business partners. But then that was supposed to go into effect on August 15th, and what happened then was that Putin and Trump met in Alaska on that day, and the sanctions were suspended. But this revival of the Lindsey Graham sanctions idea comes in the context of this peace proposal that came out of the White House in Russia, the Vitkov-Dmitriev peace proposal, 28-point plan. And what we're seeing is that Trump is very keen to bring this war to an end. So he's offered this peace plan. It contains some significant concessions in terms of Kremlin is no longer asking for de jure recognition of its sovereignty over the occupied territories, but just de facto, which technically would leave them as Ukraine's sovereign territory, and giving up territories being a red line for Zelensky. But more importantly, the White House is now providing, come with a stick in order to make this happen, because Zelensky's shown himself to be reluctant to accept this deal. And not only has Lindsey Graham tariffs come up as pressure on the Kremlin to accept this deal under the threat if he fails, then these sanctions will come. But also, yesterday, the White House said that they will cut Ukraine off from all its weapons and intelligence support if Zelensky doesn't accept this deal. This is like a big blow. Ukraine is entirely dependent on US air defense missiles and also the intelligence. Without the intelligence, its position on the battlefield is seriously denigrated. And so what you're seeing is the White House sticking carrots, good deals, some decent concessions, and at the same time the stick is sanctions on Russia, cutting Ukraine off from the intelligence, as Trump is trying to push through a preliminary agreement of this deal before Thanksgiving, which is next Thursday.
Help us also understand the numbers here, Ben. Do you see the bill getting the support of the 218 lawmakers that's required for it to be passed?
I'm not an expert on US politics. I can tell you that the fatigue in the US is growing. Basically, the problem undermining this is that the confidence that Ukraine can come out of this war as a victory is basically zero, and increasingly it's seen as an unwinnable war. And so the resolve in Congress and the Senate in order to do something to bring it to an end is growing. Consequently, I think people are lining up behind what is a very extreme sanction package. A lot of people say it's unworkable. Nevertheless, the threat is become real in an effort, as I say, to pressure Putin into making concessions at the negotiating table. And the thing about Putin is, because he thinks he's winning the war, which, if you ask me, he is, he doesn't see the need to negotiate at all. He doesn't see the need to give any concessions away. And consequently, this is why the sanctions threats are becoming more and more extreme in order to push him into the corner where he has to give up something at the table and agree to finish the war.
Well, that's right, and is also evident with the fatigue that the Ukrainian forces now have. But I thank Ben for joining us and sharing his opinions here on NewsX World. And now, viewers, we shift our focus. The outcome of Brazil's COP30 climate summit remains in limbo, with the European Union rejecting a draft agreement as it claims does not have to do enough to advance global efforts to cut the greenhouse gas emissions. Brazil, that's hosting the summit in Belém, has argued that this gathering is a pivotal moment for international climate cooperation. Brazil has urged other nations to overcome divides on key issues such as the future of fossil fuels and to send a strong message that only collaborative global action can effectively combat climate change. The deadlock comes as the world faces increasing pressure to tackle the environmental crisis head-on. And that's a wrap on the NewsX Eurozone. Keep watching NewsX World for more news from around the world.